so thanks for joining us, everybody, and talking a louder than normal voices. We're trying to make sure the people online can hear us as well. So I'm Brian Wright. I am the principal of Town Planning Urban Design Collaborative and leading the consulting team to help with update of the comprehensive plan for the future. We'll go do some quick introductions. Everybody knows everybody.
My name is Danny Kearns, and I'm with the South Congress Neighborhood Association.
I'm Tony Sutton, and I'm Neighborhood Association for South Congress.
Claire Morris, I'm with Town Planning Urban Design Collaborative.
I'm John Burrell with work with TD Bank here at Spartanburg.
I'm Anna. I'm also.
We have some online that are watching and participating.
Yes, those online, would you like to introduce yourself?
Just call on whoever participates.
Sherry?
Hi, I'm Sherry Barrett with Upstate Forever.
Great, welcome. Stephen, how about you?
Stephen Sykes. I'm just an interested citizen.
Okay. Natalia?
Hi, good morning. I'm Natalia Valenzuela Swanson, and I'm with the Mary Black Foundation.
Great. Martin? Well, that's Martin. I think you all know him. All right.
All right, so we are here today to.
Livingston is Spartanburg.
There we go. We are here today to learn and hear what's going on before speaking. Wanted to really focus on transportation this meeting, I think. Right?
Oh,
Sorry, land use.
Land use and housing.
Wrong slide here. So land use, community character and housing.
yes.
Sorry, anybody who's interested in transportation, sorry to get you excited. So we have, for those who are new to the process thus far, we are in a follow-up public engagement event. We did several months ago. Hey, ooh.
Ooh, right there.
With the donuts. We had a multi-day event on Flamelooza several months ago now, and so we got a lot of input. And then after we got that input, we started working on the draft of the plan. And so the draft plan has been put out online for people to review and get public comment. But because we had to do the original event online, we wanted to, now we can all get in person again, really sit down and one, see if we missed anybody, people participate first time around. Two, if there's any new ideas or something like that. So what we heard in the process thus far related to land use and character and housing things, we heard that the city is very neighborhood focused, which is good. We heard some of that last night as well. That the north side development has been good, it's sort of walkable, attractive, that south side needs some improvement. We heard about the possibility of high-speed rail coming in the next 20 years, which could have an impact on housing and character and things. We heard there's a need for more green space that's accessible to all neighborhoods. We heard that there's an interest in working on a green infrastructure plan to look at networks for recreation and sustainability of things, that there aren't many large parks in the city. There needs to be a broader variety of parks and rec amenities, like play areas for preteens, and then areas and spaces for teenagers, playgrounds, like use of everything, so much. And then sensory paths and features for diverse communities. And we also heard that we have greater focus on sustainability in the city. We heard that homelessness is a real issue, growing. I'd estimate there's like 267 homeless people in the city, but people think that's low, but there's actually more than that. They just don't count it. That the city has more renters than owners right now, which is an interesting statistic. You don't see that in all cities, but when you have as many higher education institutions, We heard that the housing stock in the city core is older, that accessory dwelling units aren't currently allowed. That's like people being able to live above a garage or a separate secondary building on the property. We heard there's a need for culturally appropriate amenities for the neighborhoods, and that a lot of neighborhoods are food desert, no access to good healthy food, and grocery. And then we were hearing just kind of the last few things here. Need to have a wider variety of housing types, start working on affordability. And then we've learned that lots of people choose to live outside the city to get more value for their housing dollar. So all of these things we heard about and kind of went into our thinking process as we were going through and working on the draft of the plan. But, you know, we heard a good bit about housing for sure, but, you know, sure we haven't heard everything. So the process of these meetings is just to open it up for discussion. You know, anybody have any particular thoughts about housing, about character, about land use? The character issue is one of the hardest because, you know, people say, what is Spartanburg's vibe? What's the character? What does it, you know, kind of look like, feel like? And then everybody has a different definition of what that means, you know? And so, you know, in any city, there shouldn't be just one character, right? There's all kinds of different, you know, rural, urban, and everything in between. But it's really trying to figure out what that means to one of the things that will come out of comprehensive plan update. We talked about zoning ordinance. And zoning ordinance will determine very directly what the future character is. So it's something we work in and they say, well, you know, we like our city, our downtown is good or whatever. Our downtown good. But we really are ready to kind of go to the next level. We're going to become a bigger city, you know, and really all the buildings. And they all have a couple of tower there, it's so tall, and, you know, but in general, you'll have a lower scale downtown. Some cities we hear, we talked about the idea of neighborhood centers last night. The plan talks about that, making it an identifiable sort of mixed use center in the neighborhood where we gather big needs there. So, you know, a lot of cities aren't zoned to have any kind of a commercial mixed use center. So adding things like that. So just want to hear, you know, about any of these topics and really maybe like what made you think you wanted to come to this meeting here or what you're able to share. So that's what I was talking about.
ADUs are what I really want to see in the plan.
Okay.
Since we're dealing with that could help with the homeless situation. I don't know if we have to have special zoning for that or not, but that would help. Even so much as we can do for office space, so there can be some mixed zoning and residential and ADUs and stuff. So.
Yeah.
And then we have a whole lot of college kids here, so ADUs can help.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that we see when you have ADUs, you really solve help with two different things. One is help meet housing shortage, right? The other thing is if you have a lot that's big enough where you have a building that's already on the back of your lot, whatever, it's a good habitable, nice place for somebody to live. It's good income, you know. And so all of a sudden you're like, if the zoning didn't allow you to do anything with that before, now you can. That's huge. Like we have an accessory to my house. I have past two houses that I've lived in. I've had a tenant living in there for 8, 9 years. Only 2 different tenants. I mean, all of them.
What is an ADU?
Accessory dwelling unit. So like, you know, just like you see in a historic place, you know, there'd be a space built out over a garage or like a little carriage house or back building, you know, and fancy areas are called pool house or whatever.
And right now, our zoning doesn't allow that. So,
Right, I think
because, and that's what I don't understand, but right now, our zoning only allows for like single family residential.
In certain areas, and in other areas you can do multifamily or, you know, use whatever, but in the single family neighborhoods, it like most cities, if I remember correctly, it's not currently allowed by right. So there may be, and I don't even know if you want to do this, but some places will allow you to like go get make special request to do it, and then there, you know, a day, please, just make it easy. So all you have to do is go pull the permit. You don't have to go get permission or any sort of rezoning or whatever. So I think that's what we would see. And what we find is not necessarily that you would have a lot of homeless people move into the accessory dwelling neighborhoods, but now you get people who are, what do you call them? Hello, come on in, morning. But you talk about people being underhoused, right? So somebody who actually could afford more, but there's not an opportunity, there's not something for them to afford to rent or buy. And so then they take the housing that's needed for people who can't more, and then so it's like this weird sort of system that happens. And so if we can start to get people housed up, then you can free up some of that lower end of the housing market. So.
Boy, I definitely know that.
Came in late too, so.
Well, actually, I'm not. I was on the outside saying Matthew.
Oh, no, no,
I
no.
got something to do.
No, it's fine. I was just gonna say, we already introduced ourselves.
Oh,
So
okay.
I was in the soul. I was ready to go. I just wanted to get it.
Okay, I am Jane Sally, and I live on the west side, so I went to the first. Oh, story this town. I am the previous resident of Cottages, when I lived on Oakwood Circle. I'm a previous event manager of the Rockers, and I have gotten involved with one lady from the state of Washington. She's in Columbia and some of the plan, so we have a little solidity, everything out of breath. But we're just here to be a part of the plan and bring our ideas. Okay, that's our first interaction.
She's my coach, yeah, I'm trying to, I'm in her, so.
The master builder, so you let them make it a little higher.
I am the founder and CEO of a nonprofit called Shepherd's Transformation Communities. And it's a scattered community, mixed youth, mixed income, that we would like to bring to Greenville and South Carolina all together. And it is with background trauma informed care option. So the option to get out of public assistance, come to our program, work with do the program to implement to information. And or if you have a choice, if you're stable in the job, just come into our program. We want to mix it up because if a person that is still and they see person at 50% AMI, they're going to want to reach that 50%. And with the encouragement of transformation talk, we'll be able to guide them to that.
What's the name of the organization?
Shepherd's Transformation Mansions Communities. So the short is STS.
All right, so let's keep it going. So I said earlier that, it's a time to share with our
I'm moving this to the middle. Everybody remember to speak up. Apparently they're having a little hard time hearing everyone.
Yeah, we're streaming it, so.
Ooh, ooh. So we have provided the opportunity for all the neighborhood meetings that are back to back with this, for them to be able to live stream from there.
Okay.
So in theory, hopefully they let you know that you could stay and they were live.
Yeah,
streaming.
that's what we were wondering.
Okay,
But
good.
I mean, I have a duty over here. so
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
Close to the
And then some people just joined from online. They were unable to get there.
So, and we're recording.
And we're
So it
recording
can
and
be
we'll post
for people who
online.
missed, so they can go online and take a look. So the process of these the meetings is just to talk about anything related to land use, character, community character, housing, et cetera, and share thoughts with us. So first comment was about accessory dwelling units, so to allow that, and the plan recommends that. So.
And I'm just curious, again, educate me a little bit, but does that, for her to have the opportunity to build an ADU or whatever onto her property, does the city need to have more flexibility in zoning? Is that how we get
It
there?
has to just allow, like right now, it's typical zoning would not allow for you to have an accessory structure or use on a single family lot.
Mhm.
It's just literally prohibited. So you could have like a shed for like lawn equipment and stuff, but you couldn't have convert it to somebody living, whatever. So, so that's the idea. So the zoning is the issue.
And so we just need more flexible zoning terms.
That's right. So, and then one of the first recommendations of the comprehensive plan is to update the zoning ordinance to solve issues like this.
So when is that?
When is what?
The updating the zone?
Well, once this plan is adopted, it'll be, that'll be the recommendation in there, then the city council will decide to do that, or, there's costs associated with it to do it, but they, decide.
And the zoning ordinances we have right now are like from the 30s or the 40s.
Yes.
Yeah, they're pretty
old.
I think so. They're pretty outdated.
Ones, but you have also incorporated some newer ones as time has come along.
Right. There've been updates and things made to it. It's not like the original ordinance is in place, but
And a bunch of restrictions and stuff. They'll just come in and say, I want this on my property. They don't really usually do it for the whole area.
Anna, what were you showing there?
This is just the housing section, and this whole page is recommendations. And the next recommendations, it says recommended zone update. So there's 18 recommended zoning
Specific
updates
zoning update
for
recommendations.
housing.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
already. And it does mention ADUs.
Yeah, so the plan is set up, so there's chapters for different topics, and each chapter has its own recommendations associated with something like housing or transportation, or whatever. So,
And this is the public draft review period, and it goes until October 29th. So if you haven't already, it's online, and click on it. You can word search for what you're interested in, so you don't have to read the whole document. It's a good doc, but you don't have to read the whole. Yeah.
Good. That's good. Well, and also, as we talked about last night, there will be hard copies available for people who prefer to hold it and look at it and read it. So, what else? What else we need to know about housing? What brought you? You said the ADUs was what brought you here today. So, anybody else? What made you come today?
Sorry, I guess I'll have to watch it. To see what she's done.
This accessory dwelling unit seems what we're, as far as people being able to live in a secondary structure. So, so that's the reason why she came to the meeting today.
Well, that's my second reason.
What's your first reason?
No, here.
Oh,
So that's me.
okay, got it. Yeah.
Are there tracks that are already set for affordability houses and for if a new nonprofit such as us, and we come in and we want to go into the tracks that you have already have established, do you have some set aside for affordability developments?
Well, so the comprehensive plan, is such a high level document. It just talks about things like the need for it. It talks
Right.
about allowing for these things to happen. It
Right.
doesn't say do this here, do that there. And so, typically what you would see is that, the land around would be available to do X, Y, and Z. And let's say the only impediment to affordability might be that, typically when you're doing something that's affordable, the most efficient thing you can do is have a little bit of density, right? To densify. Well, if the zoning of a particular piece of property said it can only be single family housing, then that's a problem, right? So then either the zoning would be changed to accommodate that, or it just wouldn't be available, to do that. So there's not anything, any prohibition on affordability anywhere in the city. It just so happens that it tends to be hard to do this place versus that place or whatever. So those are the kind of challenges we need to overcome. But like if the city only allows, what we find in so many cities around the country is you'll have two primary choices of housing. You'll have single family detached for apartment complexes, and there's not sort of everything in between that can allow you to do all sorts of things that can be more affordable. And so I think once we start opening up those opportunities, and that's something that we addressed in the zoning, zoning, that they would fix that as well. That was a housing type issue.
But rather than picking out certain plots of land that should be affordable, it's kind of making it affordable everywhere.
Okay.
So it's not just like, oh, people that need affordable housing need to go on this property.
Right.
It's kind of making it more.
Actually, housing stock increase. You get more housing, then you get the affordability. We have a housing shortage in Spartanburg right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's not gonna be that much. I'm just being honest, there's not gonna be that much affordable housing. Right? No time soon.
gotta build
I'm just
more
being
houses.
honest about it. And I've been a big advocate of affordable housing, but we're expanding, we're growing, the city is growing, we have new opportunities coming here. So as far as them just escorting people in just based on affordability, not gonna happen. We have a housing shortage. So everything's about business. Politics is business.
So you're saying when you build something that you're intending to be affordable,
Yeah.
because everybody's looking for a place,
Yeah.
then they start, the
Supply
prices
and
start going
demand.
up unless there's some sort of a deed restrictions or whatever in place to make sure that it's affordable or whatever. So,
Yeah, we're here tackling the homelessness situation and transitional housing. We're totally focused on that realm.
yeah,
We are both from very large cities, and we feel like we can make the most impact starting our pilot program in a smaller city and building to reach to the larger cities.
yeah, no, that's a good idea too. A lot of times in the smaller cities, the initial cost of land is less than in a bigger city to start with.
Yes,
And so it's, you can overcome that hurdle.
right.
And then also gives you a kind of an easier testing ground when
Yes.
it's not such a hot topic,
Yes.
whatever. So that's good.
As far as this plan goes, comprehensive plan, what have you touched on equality if affordable housing is not in?
Affordable housing is in the plan. It's just not specifically like this piece of that. It's affordability is throughout the plan. Like if you search, it's probably one of the most used terms in the plan. And this plan is actually set up. It's the first ever equity-based comprehensive plan written in the country.
Oh, nice.
And so every section has at the beginning these equity indicators based on that topic. And then in addition to the equity indicators, you kind of go from there that says, like, here's how we're going to assess, measure, and track whether we're having, an equitable, inclusive community. But then you go to those recommendations that Anna was just talking about. And so they're, recommendations are specifically intended to address those things, which is why affordability comes up so often in the plan. So, hey there.
Thank you so
See
much.
you again.
So what the city usually does when we do like, when neighborhoods request affordability, we have a 2-for-1. So they have 2 market rate and 1 affordability. That addresses some of the affordability, but like I said, we have real low housing stock, and we have a lot of traffic coming through here, a lot of business opportunities. So as far as a whole community just being affordable, I just don't see it happening.
I wonder why it is, if we've got a house, and we see this all over the country, we've got a housing shortage. Developers love to make money. Why not build? Why aren't they building? And so a lot of places we go, they are building. Like we're working in Athens, Alabama right now, in their comprehensive plan, and they're approving thousands of units a
Yeah.
year. It's unbelievable. And so trying to figure out, what's keeping development from happening here at all levels to free that, as you said, to free that up so that it's easier to focus on affordability, because people aren't just like, oh, there's a house, even though I can afford more, I'm gonna take that house because I need a house, or whatever. And so kind of getting people housed appropriately
Right.
and their different income levels and
Right.
meeting their needs.
So I'm just curious. I mean, you've obviously ridden around town.
Yeah.
There are lots of apartments going on.
There are.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of.
And going to your question, I mean, I'm still learning how the whole housing thing works, but I do know if a developer has a choice between building a market rate house and affordable house, because the costs are the same unless you've got
Right.
subsidies of some kind. I mean, you can't build it. The developer's gonna have to build a market rate house. So-
Yeah, I mean, at the highest level, yes, that's correct. But, there are so many development companies out there that aren't just, charitable organizations or nonprofits or whatever that are building affordable housing and making a good profit doing it. They're able to do it because they have mastered a lot of different programs that are available out there. Same thing happens for senior housing, assisted living, et cetera. Like, people are able to make a ton of money. But you're also seeing in a lot of cities where you do have a high housing demand, desirable community, et cetera. And in a lot of states you work in, you're literally required to have affordable housing as part of every new development on a percentage basis. I don't think, I'm guessing South Carolina doesn't require that or.
No,
even
it's
allow
not,
it.
it's prohibited, the state actually prohibits.
Right, exactly.
In North
So-
Carolina, it's the same way the two constitutions prohibit.
Exactly.
They don't authorize local
The
municipalities.
inclusionary zone. So,
Yeah, it's not required, but the city has taken steps to actually try to put it in there. So that's why we have it 2 market rates and 1
Yeah.
affordable.
yeah, well, tell me about that. What?
They,
how does
they usually, maybe you can help me out with that, Jane, when they match up with some kind of incentive, I was smart, you can probably
It's a
explain it more.
9%. Right now, we found a builder that will accept 9% credit, tax credit, for 15 years. And that's why, now that I'm here, I see what the problem is. If you guys saying there's a law, there's 2 laws that's counseling against affordability.
not against it, it's just like cities in these other states that I'm talking about can require, like we were in Vermont, Burlington, they require 15% of all new developments to be affordable. In South Carolina, it's not legal for the city to require them to
You
do
can
that.
just set, rent prices here, I can charge anything I want for rent. I mean, there's no gap on that.
Going back to what she said, there's a apartment going up there near the Sugar and Spice. I don't remember how many units, but for instance, the city and the developer agreed on a voluntary basis, I guess. They're putting in affordable units with, and so the city probably gave them some kind of break, I don't know.
Well, and that's what I was gonna say, in states where you can't require it, the other thing you could do is incentivize it. And
Right.
so you're able to do like density bonuses, things like that. So if you include affordable units in your development, you can do more units than you could have otherwise based on the current zoning. So,
Yeah, that's when it comes to being involved in politics and knowing who to go to and being involved, because if not, I mean, there's no law to govern any of that. You have to work within the community and.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great, thanks. Yeah, it's wild. It's because we work all over the country, we see places where like affordability is like top priority, at a state level, and other places, I've not been anywhere where people don't at least say we need to work on affordability. Whether or not they do anything about it is a different story, because there's places where we talk about even something as simple as an accessory dwelling unit and allowing you to have that, convert above your garage, and people freak out like, well,
That's why it's
what's that
important,
gonna do? And there's gonna be more people parking there. It's like, they think it's gonna have a negative impact on their neighborhood, and, it's fair enough. It's people's biggest investment is their house, so they want to protect the value, I get it. And they're not exposed, a lot of times to places where you would even realize that that's, so there's this idea of soft density we talked about, gentle density, and people just, they just assume if we're going to talk about doing something more dense, that they're going to get an apartment complex next to their house or something.
I like what, Mitch was saying last night about cohesiveness, about community being together.
Yeah.
And if you're not going, you have to let it be known that it's not a threat for an affordable complex coming up.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's taking the negativity away from it.
Yeah.
But the only way to do that is to be involved in the community. There's no laws saying that. You have to be you have to work from the grassroots up.
Yeah.
And have council members advocate for that for you. So it won't happen.
Yeah. And one of the things we talked about too last night was so often when you have an affordable product that's being built, I just using developer terms there, affordable housing of various types. The end result is, every expense has been saved in order to make more units, make it more affordable. And one of the first things that gets cut is design. And so the affordable housing options are, aesthetically, design wise, less desirable. If you ask anybody, even people living there, do you like this better than this? And I don't mean fancy mansions. I mean just like the normal, small, workers housing that you find in historic areas. And so I told the story last night of a neighborhood we worked in where the neighbors themselves said, we don't want new units coming in that don't fit in design wise. And so we worked really hard with it. I should share some images with you guys for the future. We did this one little house. It's like 20 by 20, just a simple square pitched roof, porch on it, nothing fancy, but it fit right in. It looked great. You would never know. Anybody would be happy to live in it. You wouldn't realize it was affordable. It was great. And so there's house after house in that neighborhood that sort of fit the bill, if you will, but has provided those housing needs. Now, another thing we see in some cities, cottages are great. They're not very dense, unfortunately, so you don't meet as many people's needs, but if you are trying to find every little spot where you can put in something affordable without having people reject it, who already live there, that's a good way to do it. And in other areas, you can be more dense, but even in like a multifamily situation where it's apartments, obviously apartments, they don't have to be, these sort of gigantic apartment complexes and all that. And so how do we figure out ways to make it fit in better with the character? But the best thing to do, and sort of over the years, originally it was like, okay, well, we have affordability needs, we have low income, and so that's going to go here. Like we have hundreds and hundreds of units of low income, and now we know, it met a need, but it caused its own set of problems. And so have the idea of exactly. So having mixed income is the way to go. There was a government housing project in Birmingham, right next to downtown, and it was, for years, like if you just looked on the statistics on the map, it was like the hot spot for crime and all sorts of things. As is typical when you concentrate poverty. And so they did back in the Hope 6 days where they had the federal program. They came in, they redeveloped, redesigned, and it became mixed income. And it's awesome. Nobody knows who's in which unit and all that stuff. You have people who are, attorneys walking down the street to their office in the high rises, and then people who are on, government subsidies here. And it was just
And I think that's
ideal.
what they're trying to do with the 2-for-1 thing with the city when they do market rate.
Get that mixed income.
Because the concentrated poverty is what gave affordability. Not bad.
Yeah.
I mean, you concentrate all that poverty in one area, you see crime rates,
Yeah.
you see blight. So to mix it in.
Yeah, and well, to your point a minute ago about seeing other people that you can aspire to be like. And it's like if all you see is everybody who's just in the same situation you are, and then you're like, well, obviously we can't get out of this, and it's like it's just defeating, Yes, sir.
So I have a question. So going back to what you're talking about, the design, talked about changing the zoning. So do the design requirements have to match up to the zoning somehow?
Yeah, so it's interesting.
And
Most
is
cities,
that part of this recommendation that I haven't read?
doesn't get into design so much, I don't think, but most of the zoning ordinances in the country aren't bold enough to regulate design in any specific level. They'll talk about things, obviously, like at its essence. I mean, the height of a building is part of this design, right? Whatever, but it'll get into things that are sort of massing, form, scale, the typical zoning ordinance as well. But some cities are willing to get in to the details. So they'll get into, they don't typically say, well, it needs to be this style, craftsman or that or whatever. But they'll talk about materials, and that's another one, right? So I struggle with this a lot. We were working in one community, and we were writing detailed architectural standards that weren't regulated by the city. They were regulated by the university that owns all the land in that area. But they were willing to go to that next level of design. Well, some of the areas of that the university owned were very low income compared to some of the other streets. And so they're like, well, we should probably allow for, cheaper materials and things like that to happen on these areas. And the people that lived on those streets were like, why? Why? We want our area to be nice too. That's what we assume that you wouldn't want to have to pay if you had to, get a new window or whatever. And, the answer is, well, yeah, we wouldn't. But on the other hand, maybe there's a way we could figure it out. You see all the time, like cities will give like facade improvement grants for businesses and things like in areas that, are really struggling, but happen to have nice architectural character. Maybe there's some maintenance grants and things that you get. Because a lot of a lot of lower income neighborhoods, like if you really look at it and you kind of like squint your eyes, it's an incredible neighborhood. It's just maintenance. People are like, I don't have money to buy paint and paint my house, And so then the aluminum salesman comes through and is like, oh, well, let's wrap your house in aluminum siding or something or whatever. And now all of a sudden, like some of the character that the house had is lost. And it seems like, well, it still looks like siding, but there's little things about it that aren't quite the same. Can't put your finger on it. And so I think there's some things that can be done in that regard, but typically zoning ordinances don't get into that. Some cities will do it like separately architectural standards. And they'll have an architectural review committee that regulates that stuff, so we can get into that. Yes.
But see, there is also something, I don't know if it was discussed prior to the day here, I'm sorry.
We didn't talk about much. Oh, introduce yourself too, sorry. Tell everybody who you are.
When I was here last night. But particularly in this area, there's a high percentage of rental properties.
Yeah.
And have elders living around. And what has been happening, landlords are not fixing up these houses.
That's
right. And they're letting them pretty much go to a point of decay where the tenant moves out. There's a property right up the street. The woman who owns the property. The tenant told her that the floor under the sink, there was a problem. It collapsed. The house is infested with roaches. And I mean infested to the point that you would almost have to tent the property and bomb everything 2 or 3 times. House over here, because we have a safety issue with the streets, people race over here, side by side. Car went out of control, hit a lamp pole, lights out in the house. The energy was there, they did everything they could, but the person who owns the house wouldn't do the repairs to the roof. Tenants had to move out. So we have those kinds of situations. So when you're looking at this plan, you have to look at the housing stock that's here, that's really good. And we have to look at what has to be done to enforce these landlords to maintain the property and not just keep jacking up the rent.
Why does the landlords not care if the tenants stay? Are they gonna tear the house down or find a new tenant?
No, because the demographics in the area are changing.
Yeah.
The pricing on the homes are going up. So therefore, if I get rid of this tenant who is only paying me $400 a month or $450 a month, I can now probably put some money in. I can get somebody else in here to either be a tenant who will pay me more money, or I can sell this house to a developer and get more money. Right up on Collins Avenue, these people were paying $650 a month for a house. Within 3 months, the landlord has raised it to $900. Okay, they have just moved to a house over by the airport. So you have a lot of people, because of their credit, they cannot get a home. They cannot buy a home. So therefore, they're in this constant rental cycle. And so if you're not putting something in there that's gonna hold these landlords accountable.
But like, it goes back to what he was saying, there's a law against that. There's nothing you can do about that. Even with the rental registration, what they're gonna do is hold the landlords accountable for fixing up their houses. But there's nothing to stop anyone, a landlord, from going up on their house once they
Oh,
fix it
no,
up.
I'm just talking about maintaining the property. Right. But
Well-
you know,
But that wouldn't help with the affordability component though.
yes. Well, I mean, but it would help the people who actually own their homes, not to have grass all over the place.
I do agree with that.
Yeah, snakes, you know, running Berman.
But that's something you need to address with your city council person.
Excuse me, I've taken pictures and I send them to that council on a constant basis. So,
We see this in a lot of cities that we work in.
I mean, I know, I know that you're saying, and I know that happens in my area. And what has been done because of my complaining, and we enjoyed it. And you didn't say one time, you didn't say 3 times, you have to say often.
yes, well, I not only send the pictures to the council person, I send it to the person in the city who is responsible for picking up or doing whatever needs to be done.
Are there advocacy groups here?
I'm
Are
sorry?
there advocacy groups, like tenant advocacy groups? Because I mean, that's a lot for you to
There
have to do.
is, and the city is actually trying to bring up rent registration again, but that's a touchy issue, because they're still not going to address the whole affordability thing that we were trying to tackle with rent registration. And we were talking about people living in these worn down houses and paying rent, and then the tenants being afraid to report the landlord to call
And they are.
put out.
Valley.
So, I mean, there's no law to stop that. So, but if a landlord come in, because it's a business. So if a landlord come in and does all that work on their property, they're gonna want their money back.
Right.
So-
That's- in some ways it's sad, but that's part of what helps make it affordable.
That's business.
$400 because in the home for whatever, it's
Yeah.
like, it's messed up, but it is business. I think, one of the things we should look at is, make a note of this, in our Lewiston plant, on Lake Lewiston, Maine, we learned about this. We hadn't heard much about this here for this process. So, but it actually, they were like day one, they were like all about it. And landlords came too. Landlords were like, well, yeah, this and that, and the other. So we had a bunch of good recommendations, so we should just double check and make sure there's nothing.
Do you know the landlord or who the landlord is in the situation just talked about? Does that landlord own a lot of property to start with?
Well, I know that she owns 2 houses over here, but I can get that information.
I'm
But
just
see,
curious.
another thing is when the city deeds lands to developers, and that property sits fallow for year on year on year, and you have to call to get the grass cut, to get the limbs picked up, and the property is just sitting there, and it's been sitting there for years. Not one shovel has gone into the ground to put a foundation to do anything. But that property has been deeded to this organization
That's
who
what,
is supposed to be developing it.
yeah, the rent
Now-
registration is supposed to address that too, about the properties, because we have a lot of people that don't even live in the country, period, that own property here.
Well,
So
this
the rent
particular one
registration
I'm
is
talking
going on.
about, Liz
Yeah,
has a lot of developments. We lived here now, next year will be 3 years, and we bought our house. People prior to us, over 5 years, that property back there has nothing.
yeah, the rent registration is supposed to address
So
that, so it's gonna
typically-
make them,
Typically,
register.
you'll have in the zoning ordinance, city ordinances, you know, if you get approval for development, they have an expiration. Some
Mhm.
cities don't, so we need to.
Well, I thought that they did.
Well, and I do know that the last year or the year before, I guess, before COVID, the city deeded over a lot of properties to some nonprofit developers.
Yep.
And they told them they had a set period of time to build up. Now, I don't know if COVID got in the way of that, but I do know they put a deadline. And if Martin were here, he'd probably tell you about that too, but
Well, the thing about it is they also deeded property someplace else, which is over in Forest Park. They're already building over there. So please tell me why you're not building back here too. And if you've had it a
most of
longer
these,
period of
most of
time.
these, well, most of these nonprofit developers
We gotta wait for.
are just small. I mean, they're literally small and they don't have much more money.
And it takes, people to actually bring attention to it too, to hold the city accountable for keeping us.
It's poo-pooed because of who it is.
Yeah, let me ask you this. So there's a lot of houses that are here that are next to like the woods, you know, forest or
Yeah.
whatever, right? And so the only difference between that lot, because of the woods are not being maintained, the grass isn't being cut, et cetera, is that you expect that in the woods, right? And there's big trees and there's understory and all. So I wonder if rather than getting the grass cut on a regular basis, actually plant some trees, and you go ahead and get some more forest, you know what I mean? Like some of these things, so it doesn't look like an ice, it looks like
Green
it's supposed to
space.
be like that.
Green space.
You know, so the other thing that we've done in some places in this Lewiston, we're talking about, same issue, the vacant lots. They had a weird thing, there were houses burned down all the time. It was like you were back in 1800s. I don't know, art park, what in the world? So you have these houses burning down that leave an empty lot, and then nobody would do anything with it. And so we had this whole thing where they would, we recommended that they set up for community gardens. So you actually put gardening equipment and you know, shed and water supply and all that. And so the neighbors could then start doing community gardens and using that land. Obviously Detroit has, you know, they've got all kinds of really neat ideas about what to do with vacant lots and neighborhoods and stuff. So I think there's some things, but you know, at the end of the day, maybe one of the biggest challenges is tenants have rights, right? And most state laws are written more in favor of the tenants than the landlord. However, if you're already in an affordability crisis, who has money to go sue somebody?
You can suggest that for the tenants, they will not go more. And that's
Right.
the issue.
Yeah, well, and who has the money to do it?
And, you know, like, you can't just sit here and allow this renter.
Yes.
Now, and if you get more than one person. Come along, they want to marry, I think they're done.
No, I know. And so the registry was one of the things we talked about, and there are several other different things that we looked at around the country. What are people doing? Solve this, because it happens everywhere, right? And you know, I was thinking, that's why I was asking about advocacy groups too, because, you know, not only does the tenant not want to get retaliated against for their landlord, but they also, you know, the only thing you can do really is go on small claims court to the landlord, who's got money and time to do that. You guys.
Would the neighborhood associations, did they act as an advocate for the tenants in situations like that? I don't know.
Are there in the older
Well,
neighborhoods?
we try to, I try to, but the whole thing about it is that once you report everything, I need you standing there with me saying, yes, I told you this, and you're standing here speaking for me.
Yeah.
So, but when I go, it's just me.
Yeah.
And then when they come out, person goes, yeah, well, you know, it's some problems, but it's okay.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Martin, what can y'all do? What can the city do when you got bad landlords that aren't maintaining buildings? There's some, certainly buildings are required to be maintained in the city, right?
So there's a couple of things, and I've used this example in the past meetings. Landlords are supposed to make the repairs. Call the city out, we can make them make the repairs. What we run into a lot is tenants will hold their rent because the landlord is not making repairs. That's a violation of the lease, and that's an immediate requirement for eviction.
Evictions, right?
We had a situation like that where the tenant actually paid their rent on time. It went to court. The judge made the landlord make the repairs. He could not kick her out because she had made all her lease payments. She didn't miss one.
Because unless you're on a month to month, then they got to honor the full term of your lease, and the price is set in your lease, right? So they can't just jack up the rent next month unless you're on a month to month.
So if you're in that situation, there's two things you could do. First, report it, which a lot of folks are afraid of reporting it because they're afraid of evictions.
Right.
Second, you contact legal services so that they can represent you. They can represent you in court regarding this issue and can help you. You've got to get to them on time. A week before court, probably not going to work.
Right.
But if you're having a problem and you report it and you have time, they can probably help you and stay the eviction as well.
So maybe that's one of the important thing with the advocacy perspective, to make sure the first you come in, pay your rent, whatever you do, pay your rent. I know it seems ridiculous, but not paying your rent's not gonna make you fix the roof either. And so, and then you have all the proper procedures in place to protect you.
And then you can also report it to fair housing so that they're aware that it's happening. And once they continue to keep a log and they have that, they find out that that landlord is consistent, you might be able to sue them along with others who know that that is occurring to them.
Yeah.
So those are the many options available for you. But once you stop paying your rent, we're holding your rent, because of not making repairs, it makes sense when you say, hey, I'm not gonna pay my rent because he's not making repairs. But the law, the Landlord Tenant Act protects a lot of landlords.
All right.
There's some questions in the chat from the virtual group. Is there a plan implementation section with a timeline? It would be helpful to clarify which recommendations should be high priority as the plan acknowledges many ideas are proposed for consideration and not all will move forward. That's part one.
Okay.
Part two is asking about our executive summary, if it's out yet, and if not, when will it be ready?
Yeah, so the implementation strategies are woven throughout the document as part of that. Timeline, we tend to not try to tie the recommendations to any sort of timeline because it's impossible to get to know, impossible to guess when something's going to happen, when it can't happen. You can prioritize things to say this will be important to happen first, like updating zoning ordinance like we've been talking about. But really what we find is that the timing, when you have time frame associated with it, it's just frustrating and disappointing people. Because if you don't hit your time frame, then you feel like you messed up or you're behind or whatever. So we don't typically recommend having time frames in that regard. I mean, the city can certainly, have time frames. They can decide, we'd like to do this, but having, kind of in 2021, saying within the next, 5 years, we want to accomplish this thing, knowing how many variables there are to make any one thing happen, becomes, nearly impossible to figure out. As far as the executive summary goes, we typically will do the executive summary once the plan has been set. So once we've gotten all the public input, all the feedback, because some of the things may fall by the wayside. People say, "Oh, that's not a good recommendation. We don't want that in the plan," or something like this, or they want to add more stuff about landlords, whatever, as a result of a meeting like this. And so, to do an executive summary before the final document is created, we found that you have to redo it. Yeah.
And then
in certain neighborhoods, there are state roads that are maintained by the city. So we cannot put in the safety issues that we need to cut down our things that could injure people and injure property. Is there any way that you could put something in there that perhaps the city could look into taking over these roads and that they actually become city roads so that we could have speed humps to cut down on the speeders that are out here during the week, that we could get safety notices put up on the streets that slow traffic down? That's a big issue.
Yeah, the one thing that people always assume is that if it's a state street, state road, there's no way to have it changed or improved, which isn't the case. It's hard, definitely isn't easy, but we've got one right now. We have a state road that's going right through the middle of the village that want to make the neighborhood centers into walkable, it's used for that. And it's like 5 lanes across currently, and it's ridiculous. No one's ever gonna walk across that. So we worked with the state for like 3 years, and finally got announced maybe 2 lanes with a turn lane, with crosswalks and very pedestrian friendly sidewalks and all that stuff. It wasn't easy, but yeah, I mean there are situations where do y'all ever do that, Martin, where a city takes over a state road?
We can take over certain state roads.
You have to buy it from them. They don't give it.
That's part of the challenge is we ask them to make the improvements or to make improvements before we take it over in a lot of cases. Sometimes we'll make the improvements before we take over the state road, but it all depends on what needs to be accomplished on that road before we take it over. There's a lot of state roads in the city, and that's part of the challenge, even state roads in neighborhoods. which is not the case. Yeah, Bomar is a state road.
State just likes having all these roads.
Yeah, it's
No.
so bizarre.
I think it's the, when it was originally set up, a lot of the roads were state roads.
Yeah.
And over time, depending on the road, they gave them to cities. Cities developed their own roads. Those became city roads. So I think it's historical primarily. A majority of these roads are state roads. The state likes to keep roads in a certain format for transportation, and it's primarily vehicle centric. A lot of state roads are not people centric,
Right.
and that's part of the challenge.
I mean, you just look at this road, I'm looking at it, satellite picture here, it goes to nowhere, you know, I mean, it has ends to it, so there's not a big benefit from the state perspective of moving cars quickly and all that stuff, so this would be a good example of a road that could be changed, so we need to make note of that if we haven't talked about it already. All right, let's get clear on this list.
There's another question about ADUs. Are ADUs included within the neighborhood controlled growth area? So is the recommendation to allow ADUs recommended in the neighborhood controlled growth sector?
I don't know if we got that specific on a per sector basis with where things should be. It's more, you know, the zoning ordinance, to rewrite the zoning ordinance, you go through a similar process to what we've done for this plan, you know, and that it would require a specific study to look at where it makes sense. But I mean, in general, there aren't really, at the highest level, there aren't really reasons to not allow ADUs everywhere. You know, there's not, I mean, if they work nicely in a single family detached neighborhood, where else would they not work? You know, like certainly as you get more urban and more dense, they work there. If you're getting more rural, there's even more space. You could have, you know, less of an impact on the character of that. So we generally tend to find that they make sense to be.
They're mentioned in the neighborhood infill first.
Right.
But not the control first.
So-
Specifically mentioned in the infill, is it excluded specifically in the other ones or just not?
It's probably not, but we could probably
Yeah, if
recommend.
it's not,
It mentions infill in the control growth sector.
then we could extrapolate it.
But we could add it.
Yeah, we could just be more overt, more obvious.
And if you'll make that note. And then Sherry has responded, she said, she understands about the executive summary, but there are a lot of recommendations. She thinks it would be helpful to prioritize to some extent based on our expertise and consultation with city leadership. Otherwise, it's just a very lengthy wish list without much direction for a strategic project on the city's most pressing issues.
Yeah, so number one, update the zoning ordinance, I'll give you that, that's what we got so far. But I think we can, like there, I told the story last night about the water fountain in the city park in the heart of the city. Because all the kids would come to the city hall, drink water after they're playing basketball. And I said, yeah, you should do that first before you do your zoning ordinance update or, you know, because it's easy, it's an easy win. It shows that things can happen right away. It helps build momentum and enthusiasm. And, so there may be things that we go through and look at the recommendations that we can give you top 10.
Yeah.
List, you know.
But I'm sure not everyone agrees on
Exactly,
what's the
that's the thing. As soon
priority.
as we
And
do
so I
it-
wonder if it's like a city and community-led effort of what you prioritize.
Exactly.
Because it's, I mean, we can,
I think that's the main thing that makes me care. And just like that question, just like the statement she made, this is just a wish list. This is, according to what I'm hearing, this is not gonna accomplish anything. All we're doing is sitting around making a wish list. And there's no program, there's no attachment, just like, I'm looking at the maps that you guys have done in your comprehension plan.
That's the old one.
Yeah, I understand, but it's still, you're updating the comprehension plan, correct?
We're redoing.
You're doing it totally. So even in this instance, on the older one, you have multifamily housing projects, density, You have multifamily or density, high density areas for multifamily set aside in the old plan
Correct. And that's the future land use map in the old plan.
that I'm referring to. But I'm noticing what I'm hearing in here, what I don't hear in here is equity. You guys can say affordability all you want, but if you don't bring the affordability in a program, you're just talking.
No, I mean, like I said, it's like the top feature of the whole plan. The whole plan is focused on it. So what you need to do is take a look at it and see, are there specific ideas? That's kind of the whole
Yeah,
point of
we'll go
the public input time, next month or so.
Right.
Looking at that and say like, oh yeah, if you add this, that would really help accomplish that. So that's the- that's what we're looking at.
Because we do have equity indicators for housing and for land use and all
And
of them.
recommendations.
But if we got them wrong, we want to hear specifically from you what we should add.
Well, and also too, the way a comprehensive plan works is the point of the comprehensive plan is to be a vision document, set the vision for the future of the city. The city council and planning commission adopt it. And now it's like policy, right? So the policy is, as we look forward to do X, Y, and Z, does it accomplish these goals? As we make a decision, if it doesn't, we can't do it as the city. Like, so it has to be focused on these things. And then within that, like they'll talk about partnering with different organizations to accomplish X, Y, and Z, because the city is not, they can't go out and be advocates for tenants, right? They can't go out and require affordability, all those kinds of things. And so the comprehensive plan becomes the framework, playbook, the vision, sometimes high level, sometimes more specific. But it's the point of it is to be implementing these ideas and program policies.
So, as we mentioned last night, while the comprehensive plan is a vision of the future of what residents say they want the city to be, that's what's been missing for years. That's what's been missing for years, and that's why we welcome these kinds of conversations about the comprehensive plan. Comprehensive plan is the vision. One of the tools is the zoning document. The zoning document will help us to get to the vision of that comprehensive plan. And so we hope that council will say, after they review this, okay, here, we like these are what we'd like to implement. One of those items is the zoning document. We're working on affordable housing action plan. United Way, Hannah Jarrett's working on that effort. There is a homeless plan separate from the comprehensive plan. So there are separate documents that can be built up to the comprehensive plan or made part of the comprehensive plan. Neighborhood specific plans like Highland, like Northside, and Southside residents have been asking for one. When that happens, it goes before the planning commission. The planning commission actually adopts it as part of the comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan is the high level visioning document, everything else sits under it. And those are the documents that actually show the implementation.
Yeah, more on the list.
That was it.
So back to that last question about our professional opinion on the prioritization, we can certainly, say, here's what we would recommend, just on a theoretical, pure planner basis, but so much of that, I think, saying about having to be more neighborhoods in the city working together to determine what they think is important, because y'all don't believe one of the reasons why we try to weave the implementation through, but not be super specific about it. We've had comprehensive plans, like the whole plan get hung up because people couldn't agree on what the implementation priority should be. And I'm just like, adopt your plan first, get that in place, because things are still happening, whether or not y'all decide on what to do first, whatever. Developers are asking for things to be rezoned, state road, do this, that. Y'all need the direction, get it going. Then, as soon as that's in place, you're protected. Well, really, as soon as you get specific with the zoning in place, you're extra protected. And then worry about prioritizing and that sort of thing. So that's our recommendation always, not to get hung up on it. Also too, that one of the things we've seen plans get hung up on is the vision statements that are in there, the guiding principles. It's like, we have a few of them in the plan. And I mean, we had the city one time, we need to have a committee for the affordability guiding principle, like a committee just for this one guiding principle to craft the language. And so as soon as you do that, what happens is, like, we want the guiding principles to be something that are kind of like easy and you can think of it quickly, whatever. And so next thing you know, when the committee comes back with their recommendation for the guiding principle, and it's like 2 pages, and I'm like, we're like, we need like a paragraph or less, so
Yeah.
it's easy. And so we want to make sure that as y'all are contemplating things, that you don't let your enthusiasm for the topics and things get you playing hung up. So get it in place, then worry about the specifics and priorities.
Well, the one thing that I would like to see when we talk about equity is not all the affordable housing just dumped in the lower
Mhm.
Let it be spread out. Like we're talking about lawyers going to their jobs. Okay, let them see a lawyer over in front of the sites. And some of these other areas. I mean, we should not have to have affordable housing only in certain ways. That's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
No, I agree. And it's hard, like the example I gave in Birmingham, when they were redeveloping, and what they're actually doing is bringing more market rate into an area that was already affordable. Doing the opposite is hard, because let's say you're gonna say, well, we're gonna bring affordable housing to this, super high-end expensive neighborhood. The land price is too high, like it's impossible to do it. It's not like an exclusion thing, it's literally just like the market doesn't allow for you to do it. But that's where this gentle and soft density concept, so we now get affordability in the form of the accessory dwelling unit.
Yeah.
That can go right in there easily.
And I'm surprised at the example that you have from Birmingham. I mean, in another way, it could be seen as gentrification. It's
Exactly.
very hard to, do the right thing
Exactly.
without it happening more naturally. Like, I have an ADU and now someone can live there. It's always the grassroots stuff that does it more equitably than the big city stuff always gets. It's
Well,
muddy.
I
It's
think
really
when they were
tough.
doing the 06, it was a federal program. And so they had to, one, document, how many people are living there right now. And so then you had to figure out, okay, well, what's the displacement rate going to be? And, you have to bring back a certain percentage of, so you're, I don't know if it was 1-to-1, or what the number was, but a lot of times you'll see that the government built, federal housing projects that were pretty dense, and so to do something that sort of makes a sort of a neighborhood like you might see here, now you're losing density, you're losing units. And so how do you do that? And then if you're trying to have a big mixed income, to your point, you're saying, well, now the attorney lives there. Well, did the attorney take the spot of somebody who needed affordable housing and they can sit somewhere else? And so it's so hard.
Yeah.
Because it's like, on the one hand, you say, yes, of course, you don't just concentrate poverty. On the other hand, we say, well, don't send people out and gentrify the neighborhood. So it's hard.
It is urban, one of the plans that the model that we found. One of the models we found in Canada that was really helpful as far as that is that you build upwards. We have the programs now we look forward for that way it matches the neighborhood. We definitely, like when we do our planning, we'll come into the community and we'll have actually boards on the walls. You can build what that looks like, what you want to come in, and what the buildings will be. But in Washington State, what we decided to do with gentrification in Seattle started, we built upwards, and we set aside 50% of our residents paying over 30% PMI, 30% underneath the average monthly income. But on the other level, we went all the way up to 60%. So they saw those who were making 60% AMR in that same building. And it's not even good for just that for them. It's also for our program and nonprofits and for developers is the sustainability. I can't just supportive services, we need help to do that. So with those 60 AMI, that 60 AMI will pay for 2 people in the program, the supportive program. So that's how you can kind of change that neighborhood of just saying, bringing affordability, instead of bringing, it's still affordability, but we're bringing the different characters of individuals into our homes. So that's what's gonna make the difference.
Basically broaden the definition of what is affordable. And that's what we in Burlington, the same thing, we were like, because they had this inclusionary zoning, which required them to do 15% affordable in every project. What it meant was the developer says, well, okay, fine, well, I'm not just gonna take that out of my pocket, I'm gonna make that money up. So they got a bunch of affordable housing. They didn't have an affordable housing issue anymore. And they had a bunch of $1 million houses to offset the costs. And then, you know, people who were sort of regular middle income couldn't afford to live in the city. And so they had this unintended consequence of doing good, and they caused this other problem. And so we had to, one of the things we said was either pause their affordable housing program for a minute, or expand what's allowed within that 15% developers could do. So you can come at it a couple different ways. But I think that it's a real challenge. And I've looked because we work all over the country, these issues come up. They're just best practices. Who solved this problem? How do you do it? And no one has solved it. But there's a bunch of different ways to try to make sure that we aren't exacerbating the problem, right? Because we're focused on it from the beginning. We know, like, okay, let's think about this thing before we do it and make sure whatever the results are of this, if they're having an income, an outcome that is working against our equity indicators, then we need to adjust, we need to pivot. Because you have to experiment, you have to try something. Sometimes you're going to try something and it's not going to work. And you say, okay, well, fine, that policy will be changed. We got to amend that strategy. So
I think what we're just missing is partnership.
yeah,
I think that's gonna be the solution, and that's what we're all about. We're not about reinventing the wheel. We're about, okay, we need, in this apartment complex, we need in order for them to get a good job. They need to settle their minds. So your partnership with mental health, dental, job employment, all in one section, in one area, it'll bring that lead out of that area. Now they have hope. They have hope for education. Now we want to go to community center on Sunday, so they don't have to go anywhere. The children don't have to go anywhere. Parents don't have to go. GED's right there. If you want your GED class, guess what? You go downstairs into the community center and you go get your GED class, and you go get a better employment. But that has to come with that partnership with the city. Partnership is setting aside that affordable land that we need. We need it. We can't get it ourselves. We need you guys' partnership. And once we do that partnership, the bleakness go away. The homeless here, 4,300 and something. We have 10,000 just in my hometown. It can be solved. And even the public housing, coming off of public housing, we can change those bleak areas by doing a program like we're doing with support services. You won't have any more public housing in Green Hill and Spartanburg. You wouldn't have it because that's why those supportive services at home on site will help them get a better job. Transportation on site, we have transportation on site because we want you to get to your employment. Out here in South Carolina total, I have seen 3 buses, and it just baffles me that you guys don't have a great bus system. So we want a partnership also with the transit department. Have a transit department buy build our apartment complexes right by a bus depot. Why? They can get to work. Why are we building not by a bus depot? That's the land we want set aside, because most of our clients don't have vehicles. They can spend an hour and a half going to work for the deployment, and they will do it if that bus system is right next door to that property.
Yes, but see, you're in Southwood, in Spartanburg.
Yes.
Bus depot is downtown.
Yes.
Number one, there is no land.
Yes,
Down here. Number two, the bus starts running at 6 o'clock
in the morning.
and it stops at 6:30 in the evening. This is a 3-shift town. get to work at 11 o'clock,
Right.
12 o'clock.
Right.
You know, I have seen people walking, when Madison worked at Spartanburg Regional before he retired. And he's going in for third shift. There are people walking to get to work. Yeah, and so you have to look at that. Look at Greer. Greer is building small houses to address the homeless situation. I mean, we have some vacant, we have some really narrow lots that you can't put a good sized house on there for a family. But you might be able to put 2 small houses there to house somebody to get them off the street. And as far as the social services that are needed in these types of complexes, in Virginia, they did a veterans village that had all of that. And you come in and you had to circle with everything was there. So it's not like you're reinventing the wheel to get certain of these things done. They have been done. So, I mean, we can certainly look at some of those things. And especially the small housing. Small houses, what, 600 feet or 650 maybe, on some of these really narrow lots. Since the city owns over 1,000 vacant lots just in Spartanburg City. Okay, so.
Let me read you this real quick, so I'm excited, so I searched for it, I feel like I remember us talking about this during the original thing, so it says, key takeaway is that the shift in available jobs in the city does not yet match the available labor force, increasing commute outside the city work, that poses an issue for city residents without reliable transportation, to rely on the existing part of the transit system, which is not currently hanging around the employment notice of the county. So it kind of gets into that. And then as far as the tiny houses and things.
Say something real quick on the tiny houses?
Search.
The transportation, we want them to buy another land. We don't want the downtown area. In Washington State, the transportation partner is buying land all around to put a vehicle there. Because downtown is already, they used to build upwards, and we really don't want our apartments downtown. We want them to actually buy land further down on their routes and actually put it there.
Well, see, I'm not certain if the city of Spartanburg actually owns that transportation center, because the overland bus runs from there. What is it? Trailways? It's Greyhound, it's no more. It's Greyhound and Trailways.
Greyhound Trailways.
Okay, so it's Greyhound, and Greyhound buses leave from there going to other states and places. So I don't know whether it belongs to Greyhound and the city is maintaining space there because other buses are coming in there. So that's something that has to be factored in. Now, look at areas around where the airport is, the downtown airport, which is expanding so that they can get bigger jets to come in. There's space around there to build a transportation center, but is the city going to put that kind of money into doing that? And to also put in their maintenance garages and things of that nature out there, which takes it out of the city and puts it more in a central location that expands the bus routes. So, you know, those are things that certainly need to be looked at.
And until then, that's why we will have a transportation department on site, because there are shift workers that can't do work. And I don't know if they have the vans out here with their transportation department. If not, that's what we were talking about, partnership with them with their vans. If not, we buy our own vans, our large vehicles that transport.
But see, what you need to look at, I was at a city council meeting, this is way before COVID, and the employers, a couple of major employer was there, who said that they were willing to pay transportation to get the workers, their essential workers, to work.
Yes.
And so they were willing to partner with van private services. So, and I think the guy was from Michelin or not BMW, because they can, after being here for a while, they could get one of those cars, pay every month. But I think it Michelin
nice.
or Goodyear's. And so some of these larger employer groups wouldn't mind doing that. And so is that something that you guys can look into to see about a private and public partnership so that transportation becomes less of an issue going forward?
Yeah, we can definitely do that, for sure. To your point about the 600 square foot units, one of the recommendations on page 8 for zoning regulations is update zoning to include a variety of housing types that may be more affordable, residential, single family detached, such as tiny houses, micro apartments, and accessory dwelling units.
That's in the city.
That's it.
That's in
in our plan.
And I like that idea, because in our, yeah, for our housing department, we are going to purchase a little bit land outside of that. Is to prepare the mindset for housing. We want to transform that apartment into housing, so we'll have a mock tiny house where they can go in and fix it up, but they will also live a month before they transfer into their own home. And in Washington State, that's what they do for the homeless. The area has installed peanut flow there. Instead of the tiny houses, the wash rack is behind the wash area behind, and it looks like a community. That way the community also feels threatened. because they're homeless.
Well, better that than come out and have one of them sleeping on your.
Come out.
Yeah. Perfect.
Get out the way. Oh, I'm sorry. I was homeless for years, so I understand both sides, and yeah, tiny houses, especially for women that are homeless. Those predators out there, we really have to stick together. That is very important, to have somewhere where they can secure together.
All right, so we are well over on time, which is great. That means that there's good conversation. We have the next session coming up at 1 o'clock. It's the Southside Neighborhood Community Hands-on Workshop. So that'll be good. And then after that, at 3 is the transportation topical meeting. And then the East Side Neighborhood Community Hands-on Workshop is at 5 this evening.
At Fernwood?
It is at Fernwood Baptist Church.
So south side is like Southport.
No, this is Southside right here, where you sit. It's part of